Hey everyone, if you want to make your own podcast but you don't know where to begin, Spotify for Podcasters makes it super easy. They've got everything in one place, it's totally free, and you can make money while doing it. Here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start doing it today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and pretty much everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also supported, and you can even conduct polls and Q&As. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, the platform is totally free. No catch, totally free. When I wanted to start my own podcast, I did not know where to begin, and I didn't think it was even possible. And Spotify for Podcasters made it happen. They made it easy, they made it quick, and I am doing something that I love. What more can I ask for? So if you're interested in starting your own show, you can do it, and I highly recommend you give this a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening into today's episode. Just wanted to make note of two quick things. First off, I'm very sorry, but the audio quality is not its best. Unfortunately, I did an upgrade for the software for my microphone just before this episode, which, looking back, not so much of an intelligent decision. But we learn. And then secondly, there are a few deep topics that I've discussed in today's episode. So if you're not in the right headspace for it, just take that into consideration before you listen. But other than that, I hope that you really enjoy, and on with the show.
Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of Everything Kratom, the podcast about anything and everything Kratom. Great to have you with us on this Friday afternoon. And as promised, we are here checking in with our friend Tristan down in Texas. We've had a couple conversations with him before this, and actually those were back earlier on in season 1. So he's been with us every step of the way as this podcast has started to get going. So Tristan, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me, Jamie. It's good to be back.
Great to have you. So you have been having a Kratom journey, and it's been really neat because, from day one, from our first conversation, it was just super interesting because the things that I, coming into creating this podcast and like the things that I already knew about Kratom, which there wasn't much of at that time, and I'm still learning, like you kind of busted down some of the doors and the walls that I thought, defined what Kratom is and how people use it and how people see it. So I've been fascinated with your journey. And I thought that we could just quickly, mention a couple of things that we talked about in our first and second conversations. And then we can check in and see where you're at now, because you've been adjusting the way that you use Kratom, and definitely want to cover that. So basically, from my notes and from my memory, our first conversation, we met you and you were talking about how you had been recently using Kratom for a couple of weeks. You were especially into the green varieties, but the red for pain in particular. And, your pain was at that point an 8 out of 10. And you said with Kratom, it was like a 4 or 5 out of 10. But that you also got some negative effects from the Kratom. And so, you were talking about how your current doctor won't prescribe, the amount of pain medications that you think were necessary for your pain management. And then in the second conversation, we talked about how CBD is also a really cool and great tool. And I wrote down a quote of yours. You said you can even give it to your grandma, which I thought was great. And then, we talked about how Kratom should be something that's legal and accessible, but, the negative aspects of Kratom shouldn't be overlooked or swept under the rug, because there are things that are negative when it comes to Kratom and people react differently to it. You talked about how Kratom withdrawal can be real, and it can affect people, everything from like the psychological and anxiety related to physically and sleep, things like that. So, when we were talking about like, is there a form of regulation that makes sense? We were both kind of conflicted over what that might look like. And so now here we are, it's been a couple months, and, you've mentioned over messages that you've been tapering down on Kratom. So can you give a background of why you decided to do that and when you started?
I started because Kratom gave me a lot more side effects than your traditional pharmaceutical opioids did. I'm currently on oxycodone with Tylenol and the fentanyl patch, and those don't really provide me any side effects. While Kratom gives me anxiety, jitters, sometimes it makes me unable to drive, it messes with my sleep. It's been great for pain because I have easy access to it. I don't need to go through a doctor. But now that I've finally found a much better doctor that's willing to prescribe me a lot more of the opioid pain medicine I need, I decided to taper because it was both unnecessary and provided me bad effects. And I would love to be off Kratom and keep it to like a occasional thing for really severe pain, or for maybe tolerance breaks from opioids. Tolerance does develop to that, which it also develops for Kratom. I actually had to increase my Kratom quite a bit over the course of 4 months to get the same pain relief.
And so when did you officially start trying that taper?
I don't remember a day. I would say it's been over 5 weeks. I would guess around 6 weeks. It's been a very slow taper compared to what a lot of people do on the internet. And I think that's where some people go wrong. They taper way too fast and experience pretty bad withdrawals, at least when they're taking higher dosages that are required for pain or opioid withdrawal.
Well, that's super interesting. And so do you know, when you look on the internet, like the typical amount of time you see people doing a taper, like, is it like just a week or something like that?
It varies so much. People tend to drop as fast as possible. And I found that with any type of drug or medicine, whether it be opioids or benzodiazepines, people just want to quit and get off of it really quickly. If you go to the r/quitting Kratom subreddit, people will cold turkey off 40 grams per day. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. But a lot of those people are frankly Kratom addicts, and they couldn't do a taper because it requires a lot of mental resolve, and they're addicted to it. So they would just, use it, and they need to just get rid of all of it and just, deal with kind of the cold turkey. But I found one guy on the r/Kratom with 2M subreddit, the more neutral, sane subreddit between the r/quitting Kratom subreddit and the r/Kratom subreddit. And he had a great taper plan I really liked, and I've been following it for the most part. I do remember what the drops I specifically did from dose to dose, if you'd like a breakdown of that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be really interested to hear about how you did it.
Okay, so I'll start with the guy's advice. He recommended you reduce your dose by 0.25 grams per day, or 5% of your dose every 5 to 7 days, whichever one is greater. So I guess theoretically, if you're taking 100 grams, just to make the numbers easy, 5% would be 5 less grams. So you take 95 grams, and then 5 to 7 days later, you take 5% less of that. For me, I figured I could drop a lot faster in the beginning. And then when I started to feel withdrawals, I would start to follow his plan more. So first I went 6.75 to 6 grams. And then I felt great, no withdrawals. It was amazing. And then I dropped from 6 to 5.5 to 7 days later. That's the one rule I have followed. I dropped from 6 grams to 5.5 grams. And that's when I experienced my worst withdrawals. So that time, I think I waited 10 days, maybe even a little more, because the withdrawals were so bad. And ever since then, every 5 to 7 days, I've dropped 0.25. So what was that? 5 grams and then 4.75. And right now I'm down to 4.25 as of like 2 or 3 days ago. And I take 2 doses per day. So right now I'm at 8.5 grams per day. And I started at 6.75 times 2, which is 13.5 grams, if I got my math right, per day. So I'm down 37%, I checked, from my original dose. And actually, for context, when I started taking Kratom for pain relief, it was Happy Hippo. I saw that podcast you had earlier with him, the owner of it. And for pain, I found the sweet spot I needed in the beginning was about 5.3-ish grams. You know, it was usually a little more, maybe like 5.3.5, 5.4. I don't like to, you know, kind of anally go over the scale and like do too much of perfection. So like now my dose might be 4.22, it might be 4.27. I don't like try to get the numbers exactly perfect, but just really close to that amount that I'm taking.
Wow. So this is just really, I find this fascinating because it's such a targeted approach and very specific. And I find the math aspect of it really interesting, that 5% drop each time. And I think like one of the first questions I have about this taper for you is why do you think exactly that from 6.75 grams to 6 grams was fine, but from 6 to 5.5 was like just the worst experience ever? I mean, to the outside perspective, or for me at least, you know, that doesn't seem like the largest, you know, change. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I have noticed that people on Kratom subreddits who quit have the easiest time dropping a lot of their Kratom dose in the beginning, and it gets harder as time goes on. That kind of happens with a lot of medicines. I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism is. Maybe I was oversaturating my opioid receptors. Partially it could have been the introduction of a much higher opioid dose. I don't know if you want to get into that later, how my opioid dose changed from going to my previous pain doctor to this current pain doctor. But that probably helped a bit. I think it was my body could easily adjust because it was, you know, I think the receptors were already fairly full at 6 and 6.75, but then my body's like, whoa, this is actually like kind of messing with my equilibrium. That's the only thing I can think of. And it happens with like every medicine. So at least every like kind of like narcotic, like benzodiazepines, opioids, stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't even thought about that, but thinking about it now, it does make sense that happens with other medicines as well. And I've had an experience like that before. Yeah, that's interesting. And yes, please do bring in the whole aspect of the prescriptions that you have with your doctor, changing the doctor, because it seems like this taper was really informed, or at least it was taking part around what was going on with your doctor and, you know, if you were able to get enough pain medication or not. So yeah, could you walk us through a little bit of what that's been like?
Yeah. Do you want a list of all my medications, or just like the opioid ones, or the Kratom withdrawal ones?
Yeah, whatever you think is relevant to it and that you're comfortable sharing. I think it'd be interesting, like what you just brought up, that, you know, the amount of pain medication that you had either helping or making it worse, with this Kratom taper. So yeah, anything that you find relevant would be great to learn about.
Okay, I'll start with the opioid dose change, and then what I take for Kratom withdrawals. Before, I was on the 12 microgram fentanyl patch, and my new doctor changed 12 micrograms per hour, and he changed it to 25 micrograms per hour, so over a double increase in that. And he also added 4 10 milligram Percocets per day, which is 10 milligrams of oxycodone plus 325 milligrams of acetaminophen or Tylenol. And that's been over a quadrupling of my opioid dose. Like, if you want to use MME, milligrams of morphine equivalents, the kind of what the scientific and medical community uses to convert opioids, I was on 28.8 MME before, and now I'm on 120 MME. So that is over a quadrupling of my dose.
So that's a big change. And this was this change through? Sorry, I don't remember if you said it. Was this through a new doctor, or is this your older doctor?
A new doctor. My older doctor, she was fresh out of college, so relatively fresh, 2016. I think she graduated medical school or got her master's or something. And she got a lot of the anti-opioid propaganda that, opioids are addictive, they're not good for chronic pain, you should have alternatives like CBT, all things that frankly aren't true and really should be busted. My current doctor, even my psychiatrist, they all know that the opioid crisis isn't an opioid crisis. That's kind of bullshit when you look at the numbers. It's a fentanyl and heroin crisis. It's almost like a poisoning crisis, because the heroin users, which may have gotten hooked from pain pill mills, but were most likely addicts or people searching to get high anyways. And then once the flow of oxycodone and hydrocodone stops, they move to heroin. But there's just a lot of studies out there that disprove the opioid crisis. And thankfully, this doctor is actually willing to manage my pain. And he seems a lot more knowledgeable than the previous doctor. The previous doctor tried 2 injections, didn't work. I was complaining about severe pain. And she gave me an NSAID, and I've told her multiple times, NSAIDs don't do anything for me. And if you go on the chronic pain forums or talk to people in severe chronic pain, Tylenol and NSAIDs don't do much. And this is from someone who used ibuprofen when I got my wisdom teeth removed, and it helped a lot. I used ibuprofen when I was playing football and got, swollen stuff. Like, these medicines work, but they don't work for severe pain. The only option, and the safest option long-term, frankly, is opioids under strict guidance. For example, I get drug tested every single month. And I'm okay with that. The only thing I don't like about it is the cost of it. I think it should be free. For drug addiction treatment, drug tests are free, so I don't see how that's really fair. But I'm okay with that. Obviously, they monitor your PDMP. You have to get a referral. You can't just say oh, I have pain. You have to get a referral from your doctor. The doctor reviews your medical notes. There's a lot of controls they use to avoid addiction. And the addiction numbers I've seen from that are 0.19% with all these controls and stuff. It's not like it used to be. You'd get 90 Vicodin for a wisdom teeth removal.
Right. Well, that, you're bringing up a million interesting points here that I want to go into a bit more. Mainly that just this idea of, and my brother was addicted to opioids, and also, just both the prescription ones, which he didn't have a prescription, and then also he was addicted to heroin and a few other things. And so, I've seen from the family side what the crisis is doing, but the crisis itself, even my brother used to say, the things that the country is trying to do to limit this crisis. This is an addict saying this. He's like, it's not going to work. He said, everybody's coming back to the methadone clinic all the time, and they're, taking their Suboxone, and then they're missing a dose, and then they go and do heroin, and then it's fentanyl. And it's like, he said, I remember my brother saying, this crisis might have started by overprescribing opioids, but that's not what it is like anymore. That was what his viewpoint was of it, as being someone who was an addict. And I've always thought about that and thought it was interesting that, and I want to pose this question to you. Do you think that the general, I guess I'll use what you said, but the anti-opioid propaganda is what I think you said. Do you think that this comes from people who are not as well versed in what's actually going on the ground, or not connected to it, and they're just they're picking up this idea that there's an opioid crisis, and they're just kind of like pushing this phrase in a way, just like opioids are bad, too many opioids, but it's not actually, people who are in pain who are really talking about this?
Yeah. One of the most influential things in decreasing opioid prescribing was the 2016 CDC guidelines, which I have to assume you're unfamiliar with.
Completely unfamiliar. School me.
So this was basically it was supposed to be guidelines, but it's actually become laws in many states, and many doctors follow it. It was supposed to apply to primary care doctors because at the time they were 50% or over 50% of opioid prescriptions came from primary care doctors. But as I said, you need a lot of controls when you're prescribing opioids for a long period of time. Like, you go to the ER, you break a bone, and they give you a little prescription, that's fine. But if you have chronic pain, you need somebody who's trained to look for signs of addiction, abuse. You need to basically go to a pain management place and a pain management doctor. And typically that's an anesthesiologist who's board certified in pain medicine. But these CDC guidelines, the whole panel did not include one single pain doctor on it. I don't even think they had a doctor. Well, okay, no, they did have doctors on it, but they had addiction doctors on it. Addiction doctors and people who worked in academia who were telling pain management and pain doctors and doctors in general how to prescribe opioids when they're coming from this addiction perspective, and they had no input at all from people who were actually in the ground, treating pain in the trenches, trying to help disabled people have quality of life and function. And they've done a great disservice. I mean, they have killed tens of thousands at least of people with these guidelines and made people suffer. If you look at the deaths, I have it here. In 2016, about 40,000. But I don't know if you saw the recent headlines of like last year was like 77,000.
Yeah.
And I can look here. I have the data. Opioid prescriptions in 2016 were about 66.5 per 100 people, and that includes refills. And in 2019, the most recent year, it's 46.7. And I have to imagine that number keeps going down. So opioid prescriptions are dropping, more people are dying. And also more people are in pain. I mean, I've been in severe pain for years. And a lot of people just need high dose opioids. That's just how it is. I'm looking at the chart here of overdose deaths, and fentanyl's reaching 40,000, way outpassing anything else.
Yeah. Do you think that, so it seems like you're also kind of, or you're not saying this, but I'm inferring from what you're saying that, people aren't able to access pain medication. And so it's driving, is it fair to say that it's driving people to end up, taking fentanyl illegally?
There are some people. I have read stories of people on r/chronic pain just decide that they've had enough of the years and years, and in some cases decades, over a decade or decades of trying to get their pain managed. And they've tried every procedure under the sun. They've tried like 20 non-opioids, and the only thing that works for them is high-dose opioids. And they do end up turning to heroin. It's a very rare thing. I don't like the narrative, because the vast majority of people who have undertreated pain will just suffer and lie in bed. They're not going to go to the street. Some will, of course, because people are rational. It's like you attack a guy with a knife and expect him not to fight back. And that's essentially what these people are dealing with, having a knife stabbed in their back, their neck, their legs, their hip, whatever, every single day, 24/7. And they have to do something. I can tell you personally, if this appointment with my new doctor didn't work out, I was going to go to a methadone clinic and pretend to be addicted. I was going to take one of my extra oxycodone pills and say, "Oh, I'm addicted to oxycodone. Can I have some methadone, please?" And they don't restrict the opioids for addicts. They can get, up to 100, I've heard of 140, 200 milligrams of methadone. And methadone, while it's rarely prescribed in pain management, it's generally limited to 30 milligrams. So, I get that the fact that it's incredibly controlled, because you're taking it right in front of them, so it's not like you could sell it or anything. But yeah, it got pretty desperate, honestly. And my pain's by no means good enough that I can work right now, but it's enough that I can sit here and, deal with insurance and medical calls and have this podcast with you, and enjoy my life a little bit more. I've had a lot less suicidal thoughts. I bet there's thousands of people in severe chronic pain killing themselves that just no one tracks it, because no one wants to admit that not only are they killing people by pushing addicts from pills to heroin that's laced with fentanyl, they're also killing people like me and my community that just can't handle the pain and deal with suicide. Over 90% of people in severe chronic pain have anxiety and depression, and we know that can cause suicide. So when I was with my previous doctor, every single night and often during the day, I would want to kill myself. That's getting a lot deeper than I thought. And I still have those thoughts sometimes, but I think I've had those thoughts maybe 3-4 times, and only at night, where it used to be every single night and often during the day as well. Maybe like half the days, more than half the days actually, I'd have suicidal thoughts for hours, and then every single night. Couldn't sleep because of the pain as well. Now I can't sleep for other reasons, but yeah, it's it really is horrible what they're doing to people in severe chronic pain.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you being on here and sharing all that. It's definitely a difficult topic, and it's, but you're informing me of something that I haven't thought about much at all, and I'm totally new to. So hopefully, this is helping to inform other people about it, because it's a world that not many people get to see unless they're in it. And how, with that, how is your pain management right now exactly? Like, what's your pain level day to day, given that you have these new prescriptions. And just as a reminder from their first conversation, you had said that your pain was given like day to day about an 8, but then when you used Kratom, it was at a 4 or 5 out of 10.
Yeah. I'd say it depends. I take an oxycodone every morning when I wake up. So, I wake up a little stiff. But as I'm getting ready, as I take my morning Kratom dose and, drink my water, my coffee or Monster, whatever, it slowly kicks in. I'd say maybe about a 3 or a 4. I don't know how much the Kratom is helping with the pain relief at this point, because the dosage is a lot lower than it used to be. I think it is still helping. But the thing was, even when I was on a 4 or a 5, because of the side effects of Kratom, I wasn't very functional. I was still stuck in bed a lot, anxious, jittery. I've had some psychiatric medication changes that have helped. My Valium's been increased. I don't know what it was before, maybe 10 or 15 milligrams a day, and now it's at 30 milligrams a day. And that's been helping. Like, I've been able to be at the computer a lot more and just do things, which is kind of like a good sign that maybe I'll be able to work from home in this kind of setting, sitting on this couch and having the desk like set up and stuff.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad that your pain level is lower than the first time we talked. It's certainly an improvement. And with that said, and you said a 3 or a 4 out of 10, that's still something that just occurs to me. Maybe it should have occurred a long time ago. Is that your pain level is probably a lot higher than mine is, since you're always dealing with such terrible pain. So I don't know, like what a 3 or 4 out of 10 for you would be for me. I mean, it's probably like an 8 for me, or maybe even a 10. Who knows? But that's something else to think about. But regardless, that's a huge improvement, and I'm glad that it seems like you're figuring it out and it's coming down a bit more.
Do you ever like stub your toe?
Do I ever stub my toe? Every week I stub my toe.
How much does it hurt for you?
Oh goodness, putting me on the spot.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
When I stub my toe, I mean, maybe it's like for the briefest of moments, it's maybe like a 5 or 6, and then it dies down to like a 2 or a 1.
I don't even notice it. I'll notice I stubbed my toe when I almost trip after. I'll be like, oh, I stubbed my toe. That's literally how it is. And the painkillers I'm taking, I'm sure to play a role in that. But yeah, I mean, you do develop a tolerance to pain mentally, but there's also like a reverse effect. People will bring up opioid induced hyperalgesia, which has never been proven in anything but rats. And the human studies show that it actually doesn't exist, so don't fall for that myth. But just chronic pain induced hyperalgesia does exist. So people in chronic pain, the longer they're in chronic pain, the more sensitive they are to that chronic pain. So it like gets worse over time. So over time, people will need increasing opioid dosages. Tolerance aside, pain getting worse aside as you age, you will need more opioids. And that used to not be a problem, but now it is. The way I get around tolerance is, I've talked to my doctor about this, is we switch opioids every, I haven't been seeing them that long, but this will be the 3rd appointment, so 3rd month. I'm going to switch from oxycodone and the fentanyl patch. Fentanyl patch also isn't covered by insurance, unless you have cancer, which is pretty fucked up, but whatever. We're going to be switching to hydrocodone extended release and regular hydrocodone, hydrocodone with Tylenol in it. So I guess like Vicodin, generic Vicodin, basically. And it's going to be the exact same opioid like strength, but because it's a different opioid, I'm going to get more pain relief, because I have noticed I've had to take more of the oxycodone than I used to. In the beginning, I was taking 1, 2, and then, you know, it was like half of the days I was taking 1, and then half the days I was taking 2, and then 2 became my average, and now 3 is my average. I've had to take 4 a couple times. The 4 is what I'm prescribed, so it's not like I'm going over, but I do worry some days I might have to go over, which I wouldn't feel bad about since most days I go under, but I don't like taking more than prescribed of controlled substances. I prefer to take less. Less is more. Oh, and we never talked about the medicine I'm taking for kratom withdrawals. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, please do.
So I'm prescribed Lyrica. I have nerve damage in my L5 S1 right side, which is basically your low back right side. So the Lyrica's for that. Lyrica honestly doesn't help much with pain. I find I have to take like a month off, and then it works for 2 to 4 weeks, and then I have to take a month off. So I was actually in the middle of taking a break, but then I decided to start my kratom taper pretty much as soon as I got the new opioids, or the higher dosage. So I started Lyrica again, and I've been taking that. I should take more. I have so much Lyrica. I have like 5 or 6 months worth. I never take what they give me. But doctors always look at me suspiciously if I ask for less. So I'm just like, okay, fine. Just overprescribe me Lyrica. But yeah, I have so much of it. I take like, at minimum, 2 150 milligrams a day. I have like a pill sorter. I put 1 in the AM and 1 in the PM. And I should take more. I should take the max 2 more during the day, since I have so much extra. I'm prescribed 3 150 milligram pills a day. But I just get lazy and forget to take it. That, the clonidine patch, and a restless leg medicine called Mirapex. My pain doctor doesn't think I have restless leg. He thinks I have nerve damage, which kind of lines up with what Google said. Google said if you have restless leg and you're under 30, it's probably a nerve issue. So it's probably the nerve damage I have that's causing the restless leg. But kratom has made it worse, I've noticed. But I have the medicine, and it works pretty good. So if anyone's trying to quit kratom, Lyrica is kind of hard to get. It's a controlled substance, but gabapentin and clonidine, especially clonidine. Clonidine's pretty easy. You can just say you have anxiety and say you heard the clonidine, or the clonidine patch works well. Patch is kind of better because it's controlled release, but it can be expensive if you don't have good insurance. But yeah, those 2 are pretty good. Some restless leg medicine. I'd recommend seeing a psychiatrist if you're having issues getting off of kratom. The only worry I'd have is then it's in your records, and if you ever get severe chronic pain, pain management doctor might look at that and be like, oh, you were a kratom addict, or oh, you were self-medicating. But yeah.
Wow, that's all super fascinating. There's a lot going on there. Could I get some clarification with it? You said that Lyric isn't really helpful for pain. What exactly did you say that it's helping you with, or what, with regards to kratom withdrawals?
How it's helping? I think it just lessens them. Lyrica, and especially gabapentin, is more popular since it's not a controlled substance. And Lyrica you can abuse more easily. So gabapentin's more popular for this. But Lyrica and gabapentin, they're both the same kind of drugs, same class of drugs. And I don't know, they just like lessen the withdrawals of any opioid, actually. Gabapentin is given out like candy for pain, for opioid withdrawals. Lyrica is if gabapentin doesn't work and you're having pain. I don't hear of Lyrica too often for opioid withdrawals because they're worried about abuse. Interestingly enough, if you want to abuse gabapentin, you have to very specifically dose it. You have to like take 300 milligrams and then wait like an hour and a half and then take like 600. It's like a crazy, like, you have to dose it in such a specific way. It's hard to abuse. If you want to get high on Lyrica, you just take a bunch of it. That's kind of the difference. That's why gabapentin's not a controlled substance federally and Lyrica is.
So now you're down to 4.25 grams twice a day for Kratom, and that's 37% down from when you started at 13.5 grams. So from where do you go from here? Like, what's your plan when it comes to? Are you going to continue at the same rate of taper of like 5%? Are you happy where you're at and you want to stay where you're at, or what's your plan?
I wanted to clarify two things. One, I meant to clarify this a really long time ago, but I was actually a fan of reds only. Greens were much more stimulating. But this was a long time before in the podcast. And in terms of the taper, I've been following the 0.25 grams, not the 5%, because I didn't want to do the math and I would get like funky numbers. His rule is actually 0.25 grams less per day. And I've been doing 0.25 grams less per dose. And with my 2 daily doses, that's 0.5 grams. My actual plan is to keep reducing by 0.25 grams each of my 2 daily doses, so 0.5 grams less per day, every 5 to 7 days, until I hit more severe withdrawals, which will likely happen at the lower doses. And then I'm going to cut to just one of my daily doses, reducing by 0.25 milligrams. Probably the one at night, so I don't feel it as much. So let's say I make it to 3 grams and 3 grams, and then I'm having more withdrawals because as the dosages get lower, you tend to get more withdrawals. I would do like 3 grams in the morning, 2.75 at night. A week later, 2.75 in the morning, 2.75 at night. A week later, 2.75 in the morning, 2.5 at night. That's kind of my plan. I'm hoping I don't have to reduce by less than 0.25 grams per dose, because trying to measure 0.125 on a scale is not easy. It's a pain in the ass. 0.25 is actually not bad. I have like a $16 jeweler scale, super popular on Amazon. It has like 10,000 reviews. I recommend it to anybody that uses Kratom. And it's pretty accurate. Oh, and funny tip. Did I tell you how I use Kratom? This might actually help people who drink it in a liquid.
I don't think we heard about how you use it that way.
So I used to do, because this is what my friend showed me, I used to use a cup, like just a cup with water, or maybe put the powder first and then mix it up. But like you'd never mix the powder very well into the thing. And then we went from a spoon to a fork because a fork would at least mix it up better. But I mean, that still like doesn't mix it up well. So you have to pour more water into it, and then you still get a ton left over, and you have to drink way more, and it's really a pain in the ass. So what I started doing, I have like I have my scale, and then I have my big thing of Kratom. I have a little bowl with a spoon on it that I change every couple of days for hygienic reasons. I take the scale, turn it on, put a protein shaker cup full of water on it, and then I tare it, which means setting it so that it only counts weight on top of that. And then I dose the Kratom in there, close up the cup, and literally 10 seconds of shaking, it gets fully dissolved, because these protein shaker cups are meant to dissolve protein, which is much heavier and harder to dissolve than Kratom. And it like uses up almost all the Kratom. And then I'll reuse that cup because there's still a little bit of Kratom in there. And then, if I'm being really picky, I'll put more water in it and shake it in again and get the rest out. But usually I'll reuse that cup for a couple days and then I'll wash it. And you waste very little Kratom that way. And it's a very convenient, easy way to do it.
Well, that is a really neat trick. And I'm sure some people are going to be looking around for those protein cups now. So thank you for that tip. And I know I will be trying that out as well. There's way too many experiences I have where there's green powder everywhere. So
oh God, yeah,
definitely don't want that. Super interesting and great tip. I was thinking, I also want to ask you, before we wrap this episode up, I'd love to hear, your thoughts about the fact that the World Health Organization, and I'm just going to read what they said. They concluded there's insufficient evidence to recommend a critical review of Kratom. And so that was their initial decision. What do you think about that? Is that what you were expecting? And then, looking ahead, what do you think that means for Kratom, at least in the US, I guess? We can talk locally.
Yeah, it was kind of what I was expecting. Reading your podcast, some of the AKA, most of the information I got from Kratom, I should say the Kratom subreddits, especially the one with 2 M's. I got the protein shaker cup tip from the r/Kratom MM subreddit as well. That subreddit is amazing. If you're into Kratom, just browse on it, ask tips on it. People on there are your average users. They're not, super anti or super pro Kratom. They're great people. But it is what I expected. It was a panel full of scientists. So it would be like if the CDC guidelines were made by a bunch of pain doctors. This wasn't made by a bunch of DEA people or some, FDA corrupt individuals. Although the FDA is much better than the DEA or CDC when it comes to drugs, frankly. Yeah, it was what I expected. In terms of what impact it's going to have, I don't think they're going to try to schedule it for at least 3 more years. So I think we got a 3-year grace period, at least. State level, I've been following your podcasts, and I think some states are going to legalize it in a controlled manner, which I'm okay with. I have no issues. My vendor's pretty good. Happy hippo. And I think some states are going to make it illegal. I think it's going to be a little bit like weed, but a lot more legalized because it's legal on the federal level. And that has a big impact on what states individually do. For example, gabapentin is not a controlled substance on the federal level, but in some states it is a controlled substance. But there's only like 4 states. So the federal government trumps state law, but not just that, it kind of sets the precedent for state law. So I think we're going to have more states legalize it than make it illegal. But I think we're going to have at least one state make Kratom just illegal, a Schedule 1 substance.
Well, that'll be
going to happen.
You think it's going to happen, soon?
Yeah, I think there's momentum behind it. I think it'll happen within the next year and a half. But I don't think it's going to be much more than 1 state. If I were to be very, very generous, I'd say a maximum of 3 states would make it illegal, but I would expect more like 1, maybe 2. And do you know how many states Kratom's currently illegal in? I think it's like 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, something like that. It's at 4. I think it might be 5. I think Wisconsin might be changing that. We'll see. I think it's 5. I know Vermont. Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I think that that's kind of the way it's headed. I think that, like with these Kratom Consumer Protection Acts, I think that that's kind of like a suitable way to go about regulating Kratom. I take no issue with making it so that, kids can't take it. And, that's, of course, I think that makes sense. And then making sure the processing is clean and done right. And, everything under the sun with regards to that. But then from there, I don't know. I mean, it's up in the air. And I think I remember you saying, I think it was it must have been the first conversation, maybe it was the second. I think you mentioned that if you were, like, I asked you, would you be okay if it was like, scheduled and to what degree? And you said maybe, but it would have to be like Schedule 5, like it'd have to be like a lower scheduling. But you also mentioned that it's nice that Kratom is accessible and that people don't have to go to their doctor to get it, which kind of is interesting now, in retrospect with this conversation, being that you were having trouble getting the pain medication you need from your doctor. So that's interesting for people who use Kratom for pain, running into that same problem if it was going to be something that you had to get through your doctor. So what do you think about the whole Kratom Consumer Protection Act framework?
I watched a podcast on it. If I remember the basics, it's like you can't sell it to kids. I mean, that's a duh. I don't know if they define kids as 18 or 21, but I guess either one is fine. I'd prefer 18, frankly. I think setting things to 21, like alcohol, cigarettes, is ridiculous. I'm 22 now, so it doesn't affect me, but whatever. Yeah, no kids. You can't adulterate it with other drugs. That's kind of a big duh. Beyond that, I don't even remember. But if it included like mandatory lab testing, I think that'd be great. If there was a way to like measure the alkaloids like they do on like on weed in legal states, that would be good. Although I've heard those are wholly inaccurate.
No, really? And that is part of a lot of the frameworks, is making sure that the 7-hydroxymetragynine doesn't exceed 2%, because that's kind of what's naturally found in the leaf. And I think from that 8-factor analysis they released, one of the negative things that was in that was that if you increase 7-hydroxymetragynine in Kratom like to a ridiculous degree, that can really have some harmful effects.
Yeah, I imagine so. But no natural Kratom is going to reach even half. Maybe, I don't even think they'd reach 0.5% of 7-hydroxy. I don't know how to say it. I'm just going to say 7-hydroxy.
That works. There's so many times on this podcast where I'm like, I can't say these names.
I can say metragine. Speciosa. Yeah, I mean, mandatory lab testing would be great, but from what I've seen with weed, it's like, it's not even accurate, so what's the point? You're almost better off just not having the percentage lab testing. I want pesticide and heavy metals and salmonella testing, but the percentage testing misleads consumers, honestly. I think it'd be better if based on what I've heard about weed, them being so inaccurate, it's better that the consumer just doesn't know how strong stuff is than if they are misled with wrong information. Like, it's better to be uninformed than misinformed, if that makes sense. But I would love mandatory lab testing on all Kratom products. That would be great. Heavy metals, everything. Especially since a lot of people do buy it from smoke shops. That stuff can be pretty sketchy, frankly speaking. It's much better to get it from a good online vendor. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, and I think you actually covered, most of the main things that are in those Kratom Consumer Protection Acts. I'm no expert on them all. I remember the main ones being, there's an age restriction. I think a lot of the time it's 21, but I know some of them are 18. Limiting the alkaloid content, salmonella, heavy metals, all that, like testing, sanitization processes, things like that. And then it kind of like differs from there, and especially based on like the punishment for people who are, not following these practices. And there's also usually like a fee that Kratom distributors have to pay to be a legal, vendor. So I think that's kind of like the basic framework, and then it really just differs based on the state. Well, honestly, this has been super informative. I think we got through the most that we've got through out of any of the three conversations, and a lot of rich material. We got deep, we got heavy, then we also got light and fun, and we both admitted we couldn't pronounce certain words. So overall, just like a successful podcast. What do you think?
I think so. I actually have a question for you relating to Kratom regulation. Just one question before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. I guess I keep comparing weed to Kratom, but in certain places, I believe you can't even buy weed. You have to buy like vapes or edibles. And in other places, they restrict the amount of milligrams of THC per edible because you're probably aware a lot of people have had horrible experiences with edibles because they are so much stronger and they take so long to work that people might overdo it. So the number I usually see is like 10 milligrams max per edible.
Yeah, I have heard of that.
So what about restricting or actually just banning extracts completely? Because I feel like that's where a lot of people go wrong. They're super concentrated. They screw up your kratom tolerance. I feel like they're way more likely to get you addicted, have a dependency, a high kratom tolerance, side effects. But I do know that some like fentanyl opioid addicts need extracts because they're much stronger and they can't just get by on leaf. So I'm kind of conflicted, but what do you think?
That's a good question. I haven't, I've never even tried an extract before, so I can't talk from experience when it comes to that. I mainly just use, powder leaf. And I'd have to say, yeah, that's a really tough one. I wouldn't, both of your points are pretty much playing ping pong in my head right now, because on the one hand, I definitely have, from what I've seen in the reports, people who, die from overdoses or what have you, even one of the cases where someone took their own life, it's so often, more often than not in the ones that I've seen, maybe not in total, but just from what I've seen, that it's extracts, that they've taken, 5 extracts or something, and the amount of kratom they've taken is ridiculously high. And, even of those cases, I've still never seen a case where I can definitively say kratom was the thing that killed that person, although I don't deny that it might be possible. I don't know. But what I do see is extracts being extremely prevalent in those cases where someone dies and they've had kratom in their system. So it has to be taken into account. It has to be considered. I can imagine that another aspect of it being that when you do an extract, you're increasing the alkaloid content, and maybe it's not going to be increased evenly. I don't know how chemically that works, but I can imagine that it could get a bit messy. If you're making an extract, you end up, having a concentrate of something that might not be evenly, concentrated compared to other alkaloids. So maybe it's unevenly concentrating things. So I feel like that would definitely be, something that could be regulated or taken away legally. But at the same time, your point about the fact that people who are using kratom, a lot of them can't get any effects or very little from just the leaf on its own. The extract is their only chance at getting any benefit from kratom. That's a tough one. And all I can think is that I would err on the side of not making it illegal, but at the same time, it's if you need something to be 8,000 times more powerful to deal with, it's shouldn't the answer really be you gotta get off of stuff, but it might be dangerous, so I don't know. I think that's something I want to see a lot more research done on. That's my answer. It's kind of a cop-out, but I want to see a lot more research on extracts.
Definitely. Your explanation or your thinking gave me what I think is the perfect answer for the short term until we have more research, is to just regulate the strength of the extracts. I think I've never taken an extract either. I was always told to stay away from them, and they're ridiculously expensive too. But I mean, I guess for the fentanyl addict, it's cheaper than their fentanyl. But maybe like regulate the strength, because what I've seen on the bottles is like 10 times strength. So maybe it's like 10 times 2 grams. So maybe you're getting like 20 grams of Kratom worth at once or something like that. I don't know the specific numbers, so don't quote me on that. But maybe if they could limit the strength or potency of extracts, but still allow the sale of them, I think that'd be a good thing. And also like have the strength be like marked and like regulated. No like mystery extracts that might be super potent or super weak, and so that the consumer actually knows what they're getting.
Yeah, yes. No, I think you're right on. I like the way that you're going about it, and I think that makes sense to limit at least the strength of an extract until we get more research. Of course, all of it needs more research, and I think that pretty much anybody would agree with that idea.
Literally everything needs more research. I mean, opioids have been around since like 5,000 AD or something, and we need more research on it. So, and Kratom's new to the West. So yeah, it needs a lot more research. Everything needs more research. COVID needs more research.
Yeah, everything.
My life needs more research. So we're wrapping up here. It seems like.
Yeah, I guess so. This has been this is the longest episode we've ever done on this podcast. Couldn't be more thrilled with the fact that I did it with you, Tristan, and this has been super informative. I always love talking to you. We'll have you on again, of course, if you're willing. And, I just want to keep everyone up to date and stay up to date myself with your Kratom journey, which is ongoing. So thanks so much for joining us, and hope to have you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Jamie. It was a lot of fun. I'll definitely be on, especially if there's any updates with my Kratom use and my life and things like that. And this was such a fun time. It felt like a great conversation.
Yeah. And I think next time, we'll probably end up going for like a 5-hour podcast, and then 10, one day we'll just start one and we'll not stop.
I'd have to do that on my phone and like lie down or something. I don't think I could sit that long. I might have to drink a little bit just to help with the pain. Drink a little, take a little oxy.
Well.
And I will, right then and there, make the note, in no way, shape, or form, and is this podcast condoning such behavior?
I don't condone it myself. I have about 5 drinks a year.
Covering all the bases here. But yes, let's do it again. Thanks so much, Tristan. This is a blast, and let's do it again.
Of course. Thanks, Jamie.
All right. And thanks to you all for listening out there. And we'll be back again next week on Monday morning. So take it easy. Bye-bye.